probably did that more than Chrysler or GM, but let's see.
When it came time to expand into the European market, Ford actually put a fair amount of thought into it. They did have a presence before that, but the Blue Oval's European outfit, aptly named Ford of Europe, was founded in 1967, merging the automaker's UK, Germany, and Ireland offshoots. That's the Republic of Ireland, by the way. In 1967, the first model to appear from this new merger was the original Transit, which would go on to become the literal face of vans in Europe, certainly the UK, and rightfully so. Ford of Europe continued to do the European expansion properly by opening production facilities all over Europe. Today, the European arm of Ford operates 7 manufacturing facilities on the continent in the UK, Germany, Romania, Turkey, and Spain. Ford also did this whole thing right by developing and designing cars specifically for the European market. The Fiesta, although they tried to market it to North America, which failed miserably, went on to become such a huge success in Europe that they discontinued it last year. Nice. Yes.
They don't make the Fiesta in Europe anymore? God, that always had like random little phases where it came to North America. And, you have a niche market, like some people like them here, but a lot of people, of course, in the masses don't. It's too small, right? Everyone loves big cars here. But I always thought it was pretty cool, especially the sporty models like a Fiesta ST or something. I'd love to drive one someday just to see how they drive. I've seen them, of course, on the road. But yeah, I would think that car would be like totally European, like perfect for a lot of European countries. Why would the Fiesta end? That's very bizarre.
Yes, I'm also bitter about the Fiesta's discontinuation, but it really was hugely successful in Europe, and the same applied to one of the C-segment's darlings, the Focus. Ford's first crossover SUV specifically designed for Europe, the Kuga, also did and still is doing great, and the same could be said of their Europe-specific minivans, the C-Max, the S-Max, and the Galaxy. Galaxy spelled with a Y at the end, by the way.
Oh, wow. That's confusing because they do have a Galaxy, i.e. Okay, so I'm going to guess the Fiesta might have ended because of the immense rise of small, compact SUVs, crossovers, and of course, you guys have a lot of minivans at show still. That segment is pretty much dead here in the U.S., but it has been taken or replaced rather by, like I said, even in the U.S., small crossovers, small SUVs. Those are like numero uno. They're number one now. If you're not buying a pickup truck, because of course pickup truck sales are still through the roof. Although I think they're ridiculously expensive. So
the way, which all showed the continent that minivans don't have to be boring. So there we are. Ford of Europe did everything correctly as far as an expansion to Europe is concerned, which is why they're still very successful here. So what happened to the other two? Let's start with everybody's favorite manufacturer of totally reliable cars, trust me bro, General Motors. Like Ford, General Motors also had a pretty substantial presence in Europe by the latter half of the 20th century. They had acquired Opel fully by 1931, and then in 1990, they acquired Saab and managed to destroy them in just 20 years. Great job. 4 years prior in 1986, GM also officially formed General Motors Europe, which relegated GM's operations in Europe to Opel, Vauxhall, and then Saab. Now we arrive at the early to mid-90s. This was the time when another, seemingly unrelated but actually very relevant to the story, automaker was entering the European market. Daewoo. Daewoo cars started to trickle into Europe in the 90s with a focus on value for money. The Tico...
May I, before we get into this, because I do want to hear about Daewoo. I don't know much about them at all. Let me say something about GM, all right? Big history with GM in my family, especially just in my fleet of cars. I will say this about GM, and I know you're going to have a different opinion, and that's fine, but I'm talking based on fact, based on what I've experienced. GM, the big thing with them is electronics. Little things, right, start to happen, then they lead to big things. So little things like door locks, heated seats, random stuff around the interior of the car starts acting wonky, and it's an annoyance. It's not a deal breaker. It's not like the car won't drive, right? You just notice once the car is a few years old or 10 years old, whatever, stuff starts acting weird and going out, right? But unfortunately, it's not just that. That leads to bigger issues. So we have, or should I say had, a GMC Yukon XL Denali. So that's a big, like Suburban, basically, huge SUV. Denali is like the luxury one. Now, of course, we bought it used. I would never pay the absurd prices for a new one. This thing was literally 20 years old. Here's the shame about GM. The engine is perfect. This has high miles, almost 200,000 miles. I'll put whatever that is in kilometers on the screen. The engine is healthy as a horse. It is incredible. very powerful, sounds amazing. Their V8s are incredible. GM, I'm sorry, they really are. The driveline, the 4-wheel drive, everything, it's great. Here, it's a shame because that's the heart of the vehicle is your drivetrain. The drivetrains are great for GM, in my experience, but the electronics fall apart around it. Then it gets parasitic draw. If you don't drive it for like 2 days, it doesn't start anymore, right? It's dead. So like these things happen over time. It used to be extremely reliable, drove it across the country all the time. And then just one day it starts falling apart electronic wise. Things start going crazy. The seats, features stop working. And that's the problem. So that's the problem I do agree with. GM has a major issue with that stuff. So the solution is if you want to buy a GM, you buy something really old. So I still have a 30-plus-year-old Chevy truck, Chevy 350 small block engine, V8, right? Sounds amazing, runs amazing, shifts amazing, 4-wheel drive works. It's an awesome truck to drive. And because it's so old, it doesn't have barely any electronics in it. That's the key. So that truck still works. It still drives. No parasitic draw, no BS, right? It's awesome. So that would be my advice. Buy really old GMs and you're okay. But if it's anything that's supposed to be luxurious and tons of features, unfortunately, unless it's brand new, it's probably not going to work very well. And it's sad to admit that, but it's true. All right, back to, let's see what this is about.
Based on the 80s, Suzuki Alto was a beats-taking-the-bus type of vehicle, but it sold like hotcakes, especially in former Yugoslavia. One above that was the Nexia, which was a small, Golf-ish sized hatchback, and you could have a sedan too. At the top sat the Espero, which wowed journalists at the time for offering a ton of equipment for basically no money. Continuing into the late 90s, Daewoo's Lanos, Nubira, Evanda, which was also known under 10 different other names, and the horribly ugly Takuma were all doing fine in Europe.
Haha, look at this thing. I gotta learn more about them in another video. Daewoo? I don't think we ever sold those in the US. I don't think. What a weird, what an interesting model lineup.
Europe. And then Daewoo went bankrupt and General Motors scooped them up in 2002. With General Motors now at the reins of Daewoo, they devised one of the stupidest, most befuddling strategies I've ever heard. General Motors founded Chevrolet Europe in 2005 in Switzerland with the promise that the Chevrolet brand would return to Europe. However, there was a problem. The real Chevrolet's lineup back then was entirely unsuitable for the European market. The Avalanche, the Impala, the Silverado.
Yeah, see, I'm glad he's showing these. These, I kind of get, right? I don't have to live in Europe for 10 years to understand this. We all know the differences. We can all see media and hear each other's experiences and travel and whatever. This makes sense for America. And these are, like I said, generally really reliable. The drivetrains are hard to beat. If you think a GM V8 is unreliable, you're extremely ignorant and uninformed. The engines are great. You literally just change the oil on these things and they run forever. Except, of course, brand new ones. Now, post-2020, GM has ruined their reputation even for V8s. Look into those recalls if you must. Now, electronics and such, that can be a gremlin. That's another thing. Anyway, these are generally good. The problem is, this is a big vehicle, right? And why would someone, I'm trying to picture, like someone in Amsterdam or someone in London or wherever, right? Why would you have this? This doesn't make sense. Maybe if you have a big property or you're a farmer, I can see, trucks. That's another thing. But that's not most people. So, yeah, I don't see these selling like hotcakes in Europe. They're not going to fit well. They're not going to drive well for the terrain. I've seen the beautiful twisty streets and tight, narrow places. I guess at face value, it kind of makes sense with a lot of these. Even Chevy Impalas are big.
Verado, the Blazer, you get the idea. Big cars, even bigger engines, terrible gas mileage.
None
of these qualities are something that the average European buyer was looking for. So what did Chevy do? They rebranded Daewoo models from their Korean arm as Chevrolets and sold them in Europe. Yep, instead of doing the Ford thing and opening proper manufacturing facilities in Europe and designing cars specifically for the European market, Chevy just crossed out the letters Daewoo and wrote Chevrolet in Sharpie. And hey presto, new car. This resulted in abominations like the Chevy Spark, the Aveo, the Lacetti, the Captiva, and my personal nut favorite, the Orlando. Sure, you could still buy the Corvette and the Camaro in Europe, but these were meant to be Chevy's volume sellers.
Yeah, we didn't get any of those here except the Chevy Aveo. We did get those, but again, those were not popular here. GM also tried to sell Cadillacs to Europe, a market pretty much monopolized by the Germans, right? That, look, I guess you can applaud them for trying, but Cadillacs